G'day everybody, Nick Dingle here. We are up to lesson number 12 for our software engineering course, and we're going to have a look at lists. Have you found yourself making a program and then wanting to store multiple values that are all sort of related? Maybe it's a bunch of names, maybe it's a bunch of enemies' health, maybe it's an inventory for a game and you want to store lots of different items. This is where lists come in. So what a list is, it is the ability to store multiple values in a single variable, and those values are then indexed so we can access them one by one. Now, if you don't know what I mean by the word indexed, you didn't watch my string video, and shame on you, go and watch it now. Indexed means that each item in a list, such as this example here, I've got Dingle, Alice, Emily, and Bob. Each one of those are going to be indexed, so we can access them individually. So Dingle is going to be 0 because we always start at 0. Alice is 1, Emily is 2, and Bob is 3, like so. So let's go into Visual Studio Code. Let's create a brand new program and start typing up some of these. So lists, video.py. Don't know why it's saving there. All right. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to start off by just making a variable like we normally do. You just type in the name equals, and then to indicate that it's going to be a list, you use square brackets. Okay, and inside those square brackets, you start putting the values you want to use. Is it strings? Is it integers? Is it booleans? Is it floats? Is it date times? Is it whatever? You can actually store anything inside a list. For me, I'm just going to stick to strings for now to keep it simple. So Dingle, Alice, Emily, and Bob, like so. Whoop, I need to select my interpreter. Boop. And let's just print those to the screen, and you'll notice that it just spits out basically the exact same thing. It almost looks like we're just printing a string, really, doesn't it? Because it's spitting it out the exact same format. But that is the basics of creating a list and then printing it to the screen. Now, if I wanted to print individual names, what you do is still use the square bracket notation at the end of its name, and then you put an integer to indicate what index do you want to print. Do you want to print the first, the second, the third, or the fourth item? And so because programmers love themselves and they want to save as much memory as possible back in the day, we actually start at 0 for our indices. So Dingle is going to be 0, and then Alice would be 1, and Emily would be 2, and Bob would be 3. I know that's probably a little bit confusing to start with, but you sort of get used to it, as it were. So as you can see, printing the whole list does this big formatting effort, and then printing individual items just treats them as singular values, just like a normal variable would do, really. And if you want to get a bit tricky, you can go absolutely nuts because they are strings. You can get a little bit crazy with it, but I'm not going to because this is Introduction to Lists. Okay, so we've got our list. It's a list of strings in this case, and I'm simply showing you how to print those things to the screen. Excuse me. So moving along with our things. So when you create a list, you actually have a bunch of options available to you. You can create blank lists. You can create integer lists, float lists, string lists, mixed lists. Now, this is actually quite unusual. Python is one of the few languages that allows you to mix data types in lists, and sometimes called arrays. Okay, I won't get into the difference just yet, but just put that in your head. The word array almost means the exact same thing. But in a traditional programming language like C++ or C# or Java, when you create a list, every data item that goes in there must be of the same type. So they must all be strings or all be integers. In Python, however, we can chuck a number, then a word, then a boolean, whatever you want. You can go absolutely nuts. And it's quite unusual. So just bear that in mind. But let's create a few more. How do we make a blank list? Just like I've got on the example there. Make a variable, use your assignment operator, and make it equal square brackets. And that creates a blank list. As simple as that. And same thing for if I wanted to create something with a couple of numbers in it. Notice that I'm not using quotes around it because I'm using integers now. And heights equals square brackets once again, 17.4 because they're a short bum, 100.9, still pretty short, 160.125, I don't know, anything like that. So there we go. There's a couple of examples of making different types of lists: strings, blanks, integers, and floats. Okay. So how do you access those items? Well, the exact same way I just showed you earlier with the names. If you print and then put the name of your list, it's literally going to print every single item all in one. Okay, and if you don't want that, if you want individual items, you have to specify the index, starting at 0 and then moving up by 1 every single time. Moving out of the way. Now, one fun fact, because they are integers, those index values, you can use a variable that is an integer. Okay, so what I mean by that, let's create the days of week. All right, and we'll put Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Why am I using singular? Because I can. Oh my God. I'm not using my usual keyboard, so things are a bit weird. Okay. All right, so let's just print Monday for the moment. So let's just go days of week, square brackets, 0, print, and there's Mr. Monday down the bottom. Now, if I actually wanted to use a variable for my index, you can do that, okay? I'm just going to create a variable called index, very on the nose, I know. And instead of putting 0 there, I can put index, and it will have the exact same behavior because all it is just a plain integer. That also means if I add 1 to index, so increasing it to 1, and I print days of week with index again, well, that index started at 0 and it moved up to 1, it will print the next item in the list, and so forth and so forth. You can even ask the user, what day do you want it is your favorite? They type in 2 and you go, cool, I like Wednesday as well. Something like that. All right, the only thing you've got to be careful of with indices is try not to use one that doesn't exist. It will cause an out of bounds error. So what I mean by that is I've only got 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 for my indices. So if I put a 5, I get index out of range because I've tried to access an item in that list that does not exist, okay? So make sure you're using the right indices when you're accessing your items. All right, so example time. Let's do, with our numbers up here, we've got some numbers. Let's grab him, bring him down. Bloop. How do we print these to the screen one by one by one? Now, it's pretty easy to simply go print numbers 0, print numbers 1, print numbers 2, print numbers 3. There's all 4 values to the screen. But if you're lazy like me, you can use a loop like we did in the last video. And in fact, we can use the good old for loop. So let's say for each number inside numbers, print that number to the screen. So this will go through each value in our list, one by one by one by one, print each to the screen, like so. Like so. Okay, so there's our first example. Now, what if you want to know how many numbers? What if the user is actually choosing numbers and you want to figure out, well, how many did they actually enter? Well, then you can use the len function. Back in our strings video, once again, we actually talked about the len function in strings, and it's making a reappearance. So how do we figure it out? Well, you simply use len, and in brackets, you put the list. Whoops. Like so, you put the list that you want to see the length of. So in this case, it should print 4. There it is just there. This is starting to get a bit muddled. So let's get rid of some of these prints. Get rid of these. Let's just focus on this bit down the bottom. There we go. So there's the length of it, and there's our 4 numbers appearing. What's the purpose of that? Well, what you could do, sometimes you need to access each item one by one, but you need to know what spot it came from. So this for loop here is a great way of setting up an index counter. So I is the index, which starts at 0, and it goes from 0 all the way up one by one by one. Okay, and what I mean by that is, let's get rid of this. For I, it's in range, yeah. I always forget. In range, length of our list. And then when we go to print each number, because we haven't got number, we simply go numbers I. All right, so I will start at 0 and go up to, but not include length. Because if it includes 4, that will cause a crash. Because our indices are 0, 1, 2, and 3. So this will print numbers 0, numbers 1, and numbers 2, and numbers 3. Like so. Because sometimes, like for example, let's say we're trying to find the biggest number in a list. We don't want to know what the biggest number is. We don't want to know what position it appears in. So this kind of for loop is really good for knowing the position of things inside your list. All right, how the hell do we add things to a list? Well, it's pretty easy. You use what's called the append function. You put the name of your list, you put dot append, and then the value you want to add in. Now that value can come from anywhere. It can come from the user, it can come from you, and it could even come from the internet or a text file or something. So we do numbers.append, which means add on to the end. And it says it right here, append object to the end of the list. What's the next value in my list? It's going to be 9. And what about 11? And what about 13? All right, and you'll notice that this code will still work because append adds it to the end of the list, which increases the length of the list, which then allows our loop to continue going through all the values. Okay, so that's how you add values to a list. And again, you can use any source of information. Whoops, I'm getting way too many brackets here. Go away, you. I pressed the wrong button. You, me, I'm play. Give me a number, 500. And look at that, it's on our list. Okay, it's now being spat out onto the screen. What I'd recommend is you pause the video for right now, play around with all this, play with creating, play with adding, play with looping, and just get a handle on these, because when I first started coding, this is one of the hardest things to learn in my opinion when I was a teenager, but they are by far the most helpful thing. Because right now, I want to move on and show you how to remove things from a list. Okay, there are two ways to remove things. You can use the remove function, or you can use the pop function. Now, remove, you specify the value you want to remove. So for example, if I want to get rid of the number 13, for whatever reason, it is simply remove 13, and Python will go out of its way to get rid of that number within the list. Okay, it will search through and it will get rid of it. Now, I'm pretty sure it will only remove the first occurrence. In fact, it says it right there, remove first occurrence. So if you have 2 of them in your list, it will only remove 1 of them. You'd have to run it again until it no longer is in your list. Now, the other function, pop. The way pop works is you specify the index in which you want to get rid of something. Now, traditionally, pop means get rid of the last one, because it's like pop it off the list. But in Python case, you can give it an index. So let's say I want to get rid of the number 5. Well, that's 0, 1, 2. This might be a little bit confusing, but it's essentially remove the item in position 2. And you'll see that 5 no longer appears in my list. Okay, so that is adding and that is removing. That is how you use lists, and that is going through all sorts of crazy stuff. So I've got some examples in here, and I'm not going to type them up. I'm just going to ask you to have a go, pause, give it a shot, and then we'll move to the next slide. For this one, I'm taking a list of numbers, I'm adding them up, and then I'm printing the total value to the screen. I know this is a built-in function if you've ever looked at it, but I wanted to show you a use case. Another example, letting the user pop in a whole bunch of numbers. It gets sorted, and then we display the sorted numbers to the screen at the bottom. And then I've given you another one where it's just enter strings instead of numbers and then append it. Okay, so with that said and done, that's this video. So go out, have a go, practice your different type of lists before you move on to the next one. Okay, but thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you in the next video.